Hello everybody. We will be talking about something that I guess probably none of you or very few people are already familiar with, and that's the so-called viable system model. Before I start, 2 words about myself. As you can hear, I speak a perfect accent without the slightest English, and that's because I'm a Swiss, so once in a while maybe somebody needs to help me with one word or other in English. I'm 58, consultant since about more than 30 years, active in Europe mainly, but also in Americas and in Asia, and my focus is on structure. The viable system model that I'm going to introduce you has been, there's many books about it. My books, there's one in German, there's one in English, and at the end of today, you get also a link if in case you like to know more about it. That would be the purpose of this session, actually, to get you interested in that topic. Why is it relevant? I would like to start with that. Why do I think that everybody nowadays needs to deal with that model? It's more than a management fad or one model more about what you could or could not deal with it. The point is the following. The point is that I think we all feel every day that our world isn't really working. We are getting from a situation 20 years ago where we had many crises, the Y2K crisis, the new economy crisis, 9/11, Lehman Brothers 2008 crisis, migration crisis, climate crisis, and so on. Today we have multi-crises in society, but we also have more and more crises in our economic organization, in our businesses. And the interesting fact is that although never in the world was better educated management, more people that have been well educated as managers, never in the world we had better science, better products, better almost everything, more knowledge about everything, more better technology, and nevertheless it's getting worse somehow. And in that situation, typically one calls for better leaders, but let's be realistic, we have the leaders we have, and leaders can also become misleaders, as history has shown. So I suggest another perspective on the question. That's my second point. I believe that we have a problem with our organizational structures, which make it very difficult for managers, for leaders to do their jobs. What is missing? Organization, if we talk about organization, we talk about structure and process, 2 dimensions. And my hypothesis is this is not enough. What is needed is not something different. We don't need other organizational structures or other processes, even more agile processes. That's not the point. The point is something is missing. We need something additional, a 3rd dimension in organization, so to speak. And the good message is that there's a science behind this. The science is called cybernetics, and that cybernetic has led to a revolution in technical systems since the 50s. So everything we have nowadays, automation, computers, even AI, goes back to cybernetics. It's the science of functioning, so to speak. And whereas we have applied it to technical systems, we didn't do that for social systems. The social systems are hungry for it, and if we do it, that might lead to a second revolution over the technical revolution, also to a revolution of the functioning of our social systems, be it a state, be it an NGO, be it a business, be it a project, or whatever it is. So I hope I raised some curiousness about what is coming now. The point is the following. We are coming from a model of the organization that's based on the machine in the 20th century. And nowadays we're going to another perspective on organizations. We are starting to become interested in biological models because they can deal better with complexity. They're adaptive, resilient, many other characteristics. And if we look at an organism, then we can see that there is 3 dimensions of organizations. There is an anatomy, organizational units. We find these in the structure, in the org charts. Typically, managers talk about organizations, they're taking a flip chart and drawing org charts. Then we have a physiology in the organism. That's the processes, and we've been doing a lot about processes, agile, and so on in the last 20 years. And nevertheless, nobody's satisfied. Everybody's asking themselves, well, after we defined our processes, agile, and we even could do better, but somehow it's still not working. And if you look at the organism, it becomes clear that there's a third dimension, which is the neurology. And the neurology is so important because we deal with complexity with our neurology, not with the processes, not with anatomy. That's all needed as well. But the neurology is decisive. What is the neurology? It's about control and communication. It's steering. It's mechanisms like coordination, optimization, adaptation, identity, self-steering, and so on and so on. In other words, whereas at universities, we still learn that organization is about structure and process. I'm using my laser pointer now to guide you a little bit. Structure and processes, so organizational units, the anatomy, the physiology. We need to start to deal with the neurology of our organizations, the steering organization, the decision structure, and the communication structure. And we have a model derived from cybernetics. The model is derived from our own way of functioning. So that's a nervous system here of a human being. And what you see on the right side is the model that we're going to deal with it. It's a bionic model. It's the best model that nature has developed over 4 billion of years. And the idea is what can we learn from that idea for the structuring of our social organizations? If we look at very different organisms, then we can see we have a human being, we have an ape, a cat, a dog, a snail, even very small organisms. There's always 5 elements, 2 steering axes, and 1 principle. It's hardly by coincidence that we can find these similar things in every organism. It's the invariance in viability that we can detect here. And that's the idea, to structure organizations so that it's viable in the long run, able to maintain a separate existence in the long run, not only doing business, but staying in business in the long run. Now, on the left side...
Can you jump back? Can you maybe... Yes. The viable part is clear, but what about the invariance in viability? Can you explain that again in other words?
Yes, that's what science is doing generally, right? Find the general in the particular. So what are invariant things for viability? And that was the science behind it. Stafford Beer was the inventor of that model, or the finder of the model. He found it in very different organizations. So if you take everything out of these organizations that make sure that an organism is viable, then you are coming to these 5 elements, 2 steering axes, and to this 1 principle.
Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So here again, we have a very simple model of an organism with an environment that is surrounding it, like an amoebic shape here. We have the large part of a brain, the middle part, the small part. We have the spine, and here we have the organs, muscles, heart, lungs, liver, and so on. And if we are getting close a little bit to the model, you see that we draw the environment in the model on the left side, although actually it's around the model, but that has to do with the steering relationships that we want to deal with. So our brain is steering in its total environment here, and the muscles have their own environment, the heart has its environment, and there's coordination mechanisms and so on. And from that, the model is derived in the end. So you could think that there's 5 systems. These are the 5 elements I've been talking about, 5 systems that must be in place in everything that is viable, be it an organism or be it the business or be it a project or whatever. And that's a big advantage of that model, that you can apply it to everything that needs organization, the whole state, and it has been done to different states. You can apply to the European Union if you like. You can apply to your team, to your project, to whatever needs organization. So there's 5 elements, and what you see as lines here are the communication channels. In 30 years of consulting, I haven't seen one organization that wouldn't say we have big communication problems. And these communication problems are as difficult. That is not necessarily bilateral communication problems, but it's about the interconnection, the informational interconnection of the organization. These are the channels that must be in place so that an organization is really functioning. And that's the model with which we can diagnose an organization, say, well, here we have some pathologies, here we have some problems that we need to solve, or also to design one from scratch. That's the basic model, and I'm going to explain now the model. And I explain what, if you look at organizations through that model, some typical pathologies that we can detect with it. If you look at different kinds of organizations, that's what I'm trying to do. And if you like, while I'm developing the model and explain it, you have a PowerPoint slide in the chat. You can download it. And that's the page I'm showing here. And you can take notes about your own organization, whatever that is. If you're responsible for a team, apply to your team. Or if you're responsible to a project, to the project, or a business unit, or a division. Or you can also apply it in the private area. If you're working with in a football club, apply to the football club, or whatever is of interest for you. So that's how you could, while I'm explaining already a little bit, think about and applying it to your situation, if you like.
So I try to send it in the chat. For whichever reason, it so far doesn't go through. It doesn't want to Fehler beim Senden, yeah. So there's a deliver mistake, yeah. I will try to send it again. If it doesn't work, then just everybody has to take notes in a different way. But I will try to send it, Martin. Yes.
Okay, that's fine. So let's start with the model itself. Here are some familiar shapes. There's the amoebic shape of an environment. And there's an operation, that's the circle. That's what an organization is doing, providing education, mineral water, whatever kind of products for the automotive industry. And the box here is the management box. So there's always three elements: environment, operation, and management. And because we need to say something about the steering relationships, we draw it in the model: environment on the left side, operation in the middle, and management on the right side. And now typically in every organization, we have several of these entities. And while explaining the model, I'm going to applying it to very small and very large organizations so that you can get the idea. Let's start with the system one, the first of these 5 systems. The operative units, consisting always of an environment, of an operation, and of a management. If you apply that to a family, for example, that would be mother, father, son, and daughter, for example, right? If you apply it to a business, we could say General Motors, we have Cadillac with the Cadillac customers, the Cadillac plants and everything, and the Cadillac management. And then there's Buick, and there's Pontiac, and there's Chevrolet, and so on and so on. If you apply it to a project, we would have the sub-projects here, and every sub-project has their own task, has their resources, the team, and they must have a management that is dealing with it. If you apply it to a state like Germany, we have the countries here. We have Bayern and Baden-Württemberg, and Baden-Württemberg has its own geographical environment. It has also its operations like the energy and schools and everything that is relevant. And there's a government of Bayern, as well as there is a government for Bavaria and so on. So if you apply to your own situation, the first question is, what are my operative units? You can't find them in the org chart because you must distinguish them from supporting functions. Like, for example, in ZF, you have an HR function, but HR is not an operative unit because it's not purpose fulfilling. The system one elements are the ones with which you fulfill your purpose. So they're doing what the customer pays for, right, in a business. They must be able to independently manage the complexity and dynamics of their own environment. Like in a family, we said in a family, these are the family members. I have a daughter, my daughter has her own environment. She has her own operation. She's digesting and breathing by herself. I don't need to do that for her. And it's interesting that the nature has organized it like that, because in businesses we do it very often not like that. And she has her own management. She has her own will, as my wife, as myself. That doesn't make the things always very easy, but it's necessary. So they need to deal with their own complexity in a self-organizing way, right? Therefore, they need high autonomy, their own resources, and of course, they surrender part of their autonomy to the whole and must abide by the agreed rules of the game. So Bayern, for example, has everything it needs to be viable, deals with their own complexities, solves their own problems, and nevertheless is part of a larger whole, and there are some restraints for its autonomy. Now, since we have overlaps in the environments, and since we have always dependencies between operations, because we're sharing resources, for example, the procurement department typically would be an example, or a common architecture in a software business, for example, that's restricting autonomy. We're dependent on each other, and here when we have, for example, same customers in different environments, then we need to coordinate these things also. Everything that is orange here needs coordination, and we can exactly detect for a given organization what needs to be coordinated, and then we ask ourselves, what is our second steering function? Remember, we talk about the neurology here. The second steering function that is there to coordinate things, to provide self-coordination, oscillation damping, also preventing conflicts, for example, that otherwise would arise. It involves all supporting coordinating services and systems. Self-coordination also of the operative units, if they come up with their own rules and regulations and so on, and meetings to coordinate things. Examples in a business would involve planning control systems, secretariats, meetings, committees, rules and regulations, guidelines, ethos, tradition, implicit rule of the games, standards, shared services, and so on and so on. So we would diagnose in a given situation, and you can do that for yourself if you draw your system once for whatever you're applying it. Ask yourself, where are the environments overlapping and where are the operations dependent from each other, and what therefore must be in place to coordinate these things and to support the operative units. That is not yet enough. It's necessary, but not yet sufficient, as the mathematicians would say. So there's the need for another steering functions, which is the system 3. And the system 3 is responsible for inside and now of the whole thing. It optimizes the cooperation between operational units. So it makes sure that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Together we are stronger, but that must be organized. Synergies are part of that, of course, right? The use of experience, use existing potential for success, make sure that the high market share is really also turned over in adequate cost structures, for example. And decisions are here taken to optimize the whole thing. And here we have communication channels again that are restricting the autonomy with exactly that purpose. In a business, that would involve operational planning, budget planning, full year targets, defining rules of the game, case by case decisions and conflicts, corporate intervention, compliance, and so on. System 3. So decisions are taken for the optimization of today's business. In the state, that would be the administration, the executive function of a state, for example. Whereas here we have laws, for example, we have culture, we have the socialization of people speaking the same language, maybe also even having the same religion is coordinating people in a state, things like that, but also, of course, even more formal mechanisms. Executive function. In a family, that would be probably decisions about optimizing the time that you spend together in a family, optimizing things in the short term and in the existing family. It's not about the future, about should we have another child. That are decisions that must be taken as well, but that will be a system 4 function then. to look into the future. So system 3 is about inside and now. Our the smallest part of our brain, so to speak, in the organism. Now, because if decisions are taken to optimize the whole, we need another function. We can learn that from nature. That's the so-called system 3 star, which is providing real life information for better decisions in the system 3. Knowing what is really going on in the operations, not being dependent on the reporting of the management of the system 1s of the operative units, not being dependent on statistics that we get from support functions in the computer, but going there and have a look by yourself. Ad hoc inspections, factory walks, direct contacts with customers or staff, service, mystery shopping, of course also internal auditing, service studies, provide unfiltered information. It's an information channel and not an intervention channel. So it's not about intervening in the operations, because that's the job of the management here, but know what is going on here. Everything necessary, but still not sufficient. Why not? Because there's always a larger environment. That's the businesses you're not doing, for example, already, or the child that you're not having yet, or the region that where you're not active in. And in that total environment, there's the green one, there's a specific one, which is about opportunities and threats for your organization. System 4 is dealing with outside and then, with the communication with the whole environment, larger than the environment of today's business. And then in regards of the future. In a state, that would be the parliaments and the parties and so on, the legislative function. In a business, we have strategy development, R&D, recruitment, technology, strategic marketing, communication, and so on. In a family, that would be the decisions you're taking, whether you want to acquire a dog or whether you want to move to America with the family, things like that. Who is taking these decisions? Is a second question. First of all, we're looking at the neurology and ask ourselves whether everything is in place that these decisions can be taken. And typically in businesses, we are very strong in system 3 management, very often weak in system 2, very often strong in system 1, and typically there's not enough time in system 4 to deal with the challenges and the opportunities of the future. And here in that loop here between system 3 and 4, asking ourselves what is right for tomorrow and what is right for today. And how can we take the right decisions in that interface? Because for example, in the automotive industries, which is in crisis again also nowadays, there is the development of the combustion engine, according to S-curves, and there's electromobility coming, a new technology, a new solution to the same problem of mobility. And the question is here, the critical decision zone, when do we take resources out of the existing and allocate it to the new? Here, maybe too early, here, maybe too late. And since we don't see the whole picture, we can only see what we can see today. The expectations typically will be, well, the red curve goes along like that, and these are the people who are just burning our money that we have earned for crazy stuff. So that's a critical thing, and that has to do with the adaptability and evolution. And especially in the automotive industry in Europe, that's quite a challenge nowadays. And maybe some faults have been made because our system 4 functions that are dealing with that and the balancing loop between system 4 and system 3 did not really work. Like Kodak, for example, they knew that digitalization will be relevant. They even developed the first digital camera, but the management was chemical driven, so to speak. They were all educated as chemical persons. So that loop here didn't work. Although they knew it's coming, they weren't able to adapt. And that's why the company is still existing, but not relevant anymore. And the last element is the system 5. And the system 5 provides identity and policy. It's a normative function. You could also say that's normative management, strategic management, operative management, if you would like to make it a little bit simpler, so to speak. It defines the purpose and identity. What business are we actually really in? What's our mission? Develops corporate policy, so the decisions that hold through in the long run of the functioning of an organization, because that's just what we want and what we believe in. It monitors the interaction, makes sure that that balancing loop is really working, the adaptability. And by these channels, it's also deploying their policies. Policies means that whatever you will do, we expect as shareholders 5% EBIT from you, for example, as just a constraint, as business constraint. Or whatever you do in System 4, we never want to go out of Europe. A normative decision by the owners of an organization. Yeah? And System 5 to 3, whatever you do, we want that you are dealing with your own employees in this way, not in another way, or other compliance topics, for example. So that's the System 5, and now we have all the necessary and sufficient functions. You cannot deny one of these 5 elements, otherwise you're going to run into trouble sooner or later. And there's, on the other hand, also another 6th and the 7th function that need to be in place. This is what is necessary for viability. These are the 5 elements. We have 2 steering axes. One is horizontal, that's self-steering. So Bavaria as a state is steering itself. My daughter has a System 1, she's steering herself as my wife and me too. In a project, we have the sub-project teams that are steering themselves, but we also always have a vertical axis that allows for cohesion, make sure that the whole thing is aligned at more than the sum of its parts. And we need to be able to deal with these 2 steering axes. And Corona situation has shown that we're not very good with that. Either like in China, we have a very strong vertical axis, or like here in Europe, we have a rather strong horizontal steering axis. And to change from horizontal to steering, what the situation requires is something that we're not very good in. We're rather good in saying, well, ideologically, we don't want this and we want this and other, but that's the meaningless discussion, actually. We always need both steering axes and the right amount in each situation. So here again, the 5 steering functions that must be in place. These are the decisions that must be taken, right? And the 2 steering axes, and I said there's also one principle. The principle is the principle of recursivity. It's a trick for coping with complexity. Remember, we talk about neurology, dealing with complexity. And what it means is that if we have, let's say, an organization with 4 business units, if we look inside one of these business units with its environment, its operation, and its management, we must find exactly the same structure if it's going to be viable. In one of the other form, these 5 functions must be in place. And very often, managers do it right out of talent or experience. But the advantage of the model is we can do it right also in a systematic way without having great experience or without having talent, because there's not enough talented people and managers to do it right in every organization in this world. In words, every viable system is embedded in a viable system and consists of viable systems, like the fractal structure with these Russian dots, for example. And by that principle, you can design extremely large and complex organizations, scale it to indefinite levels. You can apply to a very small organization, as I said, like a team, or you can apply to the European Union. What does it mean? If you look at the European Union has its own management, its own parliaments, its own executive functions, and it has the European countries in here, Germany, France, Poland, and so on. And if you look at one of these, let's say this is Germany here. If we look at one of these, then Germany again has its parliaments and its executive functions and its constitution and its countries like Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg, and so on. And if we look into Bavaria, for example, we go one level of recursion down. Again, we have the management functions, and sometimes at a certain point we end because we're in the village now, and even the village has an executive and a system 4 and the system 3 and has its system 1 functions. And then we maybe can stop because it's not complex anymore. We don't need to organize it anymore. What that means is that complexity is absorbed where it arises. The principle of subsidiary says that only tasks that cannot be done on the lowest possible level are done on the next higher level. So power is distributed bottom up rather than delegated upside down with that principle. That's important for agility, adaptivity, viability in the long run for an organization. That's another example. You have a group, you have divisions, you have business units, and each of them must have their own neurology. Each of them must be viable in their own right if you want to be an organization that can deal with complexity. So that entity is dealing with its own problems, and only the problems that cannot be solved, because maybe it's a common problem, would be solved on the next higher level. How do we apply the model? In the books, everything is explained. It's a doing book, how to do it, so to speak. There's 7 steps. The first step is to deal with operative units. Then we have levels of recursion. We need to define which is the level that we try to diagnose or design. And then step 2, we talk about manageability, flattening questions. So that has to do with some complexity equations. I can't explain them now due to the short time, but if you're interested, you can read it. We deal with success critical tasks. What needs to be organized? We deal with the question of what needs to be done centrally or decentrally. And then we're applying it, designing the 5 steering functions, the communication channels, and here also the interconnection with higher and lower levels of recursion. And in the end, we need to explain our employees how it's going to work without a slightest word of VSM, because they don't need to understand the model. And therefore, we apply just the typical board measures we have, like org charts, job descriptions, functional diagrams, RACICs, and so on, how it's going to work. So the representation in the end will be not complicated, but in a way done in a way that everybody understands it. The last thing I would like to show you is now, if you look at organizations through that lens of that model, what can you typically see? And there's some typical pathologies that you can easily detect with the viable system model, and you would not detect it with org charts or process descriptions. The first pathology, they have 5 of them. I think I can spend 5 more minutes and then I'm done, and we can have some discussion. The first of these pathologies, I call it dissociation, or the functional organization. What you can see here is an organization where functions are seen as system 1s. In a functional organization, you have research and development, production, logistics, distribution, manufacturing, what else? And in that situation, we have large overlaps in the environment and huge dependencies, because nobody can be successful by themselves. And large overlaps in the environments, because you're always pointing to the same customer in the end, right? Therefore, you need a very strong system to coordinate all of that so that it makes sense. You have very little self-organization capabilities. It's even dangerous if they develop their own independent strategies, because you can only be successful together. That's not what we want to have. In the ideal, we have very little overlaps and very little dependencies, so that we allow for a lot of self-organization and self-management, absorbing the complexity already on that level. In that case, complexity cannot be absorbed here. It must be absorbed here, because typically these systems 2 are not designed very well. System 3 has to deal with them. So to 80% of the time, managers deal with problems, with today's business, and with urgent matters, and not with the important matters and the future and the opportunities, because that would be system 4. There's just not enough time to do that. You get the presentation here. Here you have some explanations. What's the situation? What's dysfunctionality? Typically you have a blame game here also. Nobody is responsible for anything. If the sales is not going well, then they say, well, research and development is their fault. And the research and development says, no, products are okay, but distribution is not working well. So nobody is responsible for the whole. And there's some easy measures actually to change that. Quite similar, the second pathology, I call it schizophrenia or the matrix organization. Here the system ones are not functions, but product A, product B, product C. And then you have also a second dimension to keep it simple. There's sometimes also matrices with 3 dimensions. You have regions, region A, region B, region C. And what you can see is, again, that you have huge overlaps in the environment, because to be successful, the management of product A needs the regions A, B, C to be successful. In other words, we have a diffusion of accountability, because if numbers are not okay, and if I'm the product manager A, I can easily say, well, it's not my fault because the regions have not done, they have their own strategy, they have their own self-organization, they're steering themselves, and it's their fault. So typically, huge complexity in these organizations. They only function well if people understand each other well. Very difficult to be successful in them. Huge system 2 overhead, huge overheads, and system 3, the same pattern is absorbed with managing today and solving conflicts, coordinating things, and so on. So quite a similar pathology like the functional organization. The third one, I call it cancer. Currently, I'm working with Bosch, with a mobility company, where we have 10 divisions, and they're very strong. 10 divisions in the mobility area there. It's very strong by themselves, which is very good because they are viable businesses in their own right. But to make a mobility company out of that, that's the challenge. And that's why I call that pattern cancer, because it's growing from the cells itself. It's not growing in a steered way, in a controlled way. The typical situation here is that you have very low exploitation of synergies because you don't have a strong system 3. You have potential conflicts with customers and strategic short-sightedness because there's only strategy done here and here and here, but not for the whole thing. And what you can do to heal that is to establish strong self-regulation coordination mechanisms in the first place, and then involve management here to start building system 3 and system 4 and system 5 for the whole thing, so that the environment that is perceived is not just today's business, but a larger business. Dominance would be another one. A very strong system 1 and very weak others. The company Balsen, for example, the German crack producers, not crack, the crackers, sorry, that was misleading. The crackers, salt or sweet crackers, it has been growing in Germany, and then they said we need to be active also in Spain and in Italy and in other regions. But actually they kept all the functions in Germany, and we're managing the other ones out of that system 1. A situation where decisions are taken from the German perspective, although for other regions it wouldn't work. And what they didn't realize, the management here, they realized after we did the VSM approach, was that as soon as they build other regions, they're building a next level of recursion, and the management must move from here to here, because they would be doing the wrong things otherwise. They have to move in their heads. In that case, they moved also physically to make it clear. What we're doing is not managing Germany anymore, it's managing the larger recursion level. And the last, well, dominance is always difficult. These organizations are always, if you're not changing it, they're falling apart sooner or later. Also in geopolitics, we have that situation, by the way. The reunion of Germany was critical in that regard, for example. It has been discussed a lot. And the last pathology is the bottleneck. There's many more, of course, but that's just to show a little bit how you can work with the model and what you can see, because all these things, you don't see them by org charts, and you don't see them when you look at process descriptions, right? In that situation here, I had to deal with a CEO of a mid-sized company, an SME of Nuremberg, global player, very good company. And the CEO told me, family owned, right? He inherited from his father. He told me, Mr. Pfiffner, excellent company, excellent market share, products are excellent, EBIT is excellent, everything good. Just one thing goes on my nerves, and I can't stand it anymore. I'm divorced meanwhile. I like to play golf. I have no time anymore, and I even become seriously ill recently, and that's my division managers. Nothing functions without myself. I have to tell them what to do, and therefore that command channel here, the communication channel, is very strong, right? Okay, and then I was talking to the division managers, and they told me, Mr. Pfiffner, excellent company, market share, excellent, EBIT, excellent, products are good. There's just one thing that goes on our nerves, and we can't stand it anymore, and we will soon leave the organization, and that's the authoritarian boss. He tells us the whole time what we need to do, although he's much too far away from the business, and in the end we are accountable, and we can't be accountable like that. It's not working. After these two discussions, we came together for a half-day workshop where we just very briefly diagnosed their organization with the viable system model, and it became clear that they have strong dependencies between the operations, but almost no system 2 in place, no coordination. The consequence was that everything that needs to be coordinated was landing on the table of the CEO. There's no other way. Somebody has to deal with it. So interestingly, the problem was seen in the persons, in the people, whereas the actual underlying problem was not the person, it was the structure, it was the combination of strong dependencies with very weak coordinating and self-coordinating mechanisms.